Despite the loss to South Carolina, I think Texas A&M fans learned Marcel Reed is the guy at quarterback.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, on the show today, we're going to talk a little bit about where do you go from here after the loss? What's next? What's the next step for this team? Where do you go? And then we're going to talk about some takeaways from this game. Some positive takeaways and a lot of negative takeaways from this game. The first takeaway from this game is I think Marcel Reed is the guy for this team. And I know it seems like a weird conversation to have, but I think at some point this Texas A&M team needs to be done with the whole who's going to be our quarterback this week thing. And Marcel Reed was not perfect in this game, but he showed me enough as a passer that I think the more, if you let him be the guy, he's going to develop. I mean, we have got to remember how young Marcel Reed is as a quarterback. I mean, he's, this is his second season at Texas A&M. He played one game last year. He's played in a handful of games this year. He's not played a lot of football. And, I mean, it's kind of the same issue we've seen with Connor Wigman. As a true freshman, he plays a couple games last season, gets hurt, in and out of the lineup this year. You could make the same argument for Wigman that he hasn't had any time to kind of really settle in. But I think Marcel Reed's legs, if he can develop as a passer, he's going to be a star in college football. He's going to be a guy who really could be a dominant player. And knowing that, I think you roll with Marcel Reed going forward. I think he should be the guy. And I hate it for Connor Wigman because I do. Because here's the deal. I still believe Connor Wigman is a guy who could be really good. The boom or bust is a problem. And I definitely have concerns moving forward with Connor Wigman. I mean, I could see him end up hitting the portal or something after this year. But I mean, once again, Marcel Reed's young. It's not like he's a senior and Wigman's the young guy. Wigman's the old guy in this room. So knowing that, I don't know what the future is going to look like for Connor Wigman, but I think Marcel Reed might be the guy for this team. And to kind of talk about this game as a whole, this isn't really a takeaway. I wanted to get it straight into quarterback stuff, but this is just disappointing. Obviously, I picked Texas A&M to win this game, but one thing I said last week on the show, as you everydayers remember, is I said, listen, I'm more concerned about this game than I was the LSU game. I felt extremely confident Texas A&M was going to beat LSU. I thought A&M was going to win this game. I did. I thought the odds were stacked against them. It felt like you hate. I hate narratives. You don't like narratives. And we kept hearing all week, well, South Carolina, they need this game. This is an opportunity for South Carolina to get a big win. South Carolina looks good. They're playing good football. Their defense is great. It just felt like all of the narratives were South Carolina, South Carolina, South Carolina. And it came and bit you in the behind. So this is disappointing. It's definitely disappointing. You had an opportunity to put yourself, in all honesty, with this win, knowing that I just think that Auburn is just a terrible football team. You win this game, I think you pretty much lock up a playoff spot. I just think Auburn's that bad. So now you control your own destiny, which is, it's fine, but you'd rather you'd rather have won this game, obviously. I mean, no one wants to lose anything ever, but this is just a big game for your hopes to the postseason. And it just felt like a game. Just a lot went wrong for Texas A&M. This team played bad. They played bad. And I mean, in all honesty, they played just as bad as they did against Mississippi State. I just think South Carolina is a good football team. I think South Carolina is they're an underrated team. I think they played terrible against Ole Miss. And I think that, in the game they lost, they hung around with Alabama. They hung around with LSU. I think this is a good football team. I don't think this team's any kind of joke. So, looking at South Carolina, I think it's a huge win for them. But that is my number one takeaway from this game, is that I think Marcel Reed is your guy at quarterback. I just think if you let him settle in, what he can do with his legs on top of what he'll be able to do with his arm, if you let him continue to settle in, you let him get used to the college game, I think it can be special. So I think he's your guy. I think he's what you roll with. I think Marcel Reed needs to be your quarterback. So that's my first takeaway. And I mean, was he great in this game? No. I mean, he had the interception on a weird looking play. It was, ugly there. He was 18 for 28, 206 yards, touchdown, interception on the ground. He had 46 yards. I mean, he on 16 carries, so he didn't have, the output that we saw against LSU on the ground. But I think play calling, we're going to get into that. I think that played a role in this. So, no, I don't think Marcel Reed played great. I think that he played okay. I think that he was fine. I don't think he was great. I don't think he played that help you get a huge road win level. I don't think he played like that. So that is my thought on Marcel Reed. We have a ton more takeaways. But the one thing I do want to say is do not give up on this team. I think people quickly wanted to give up on this team after the loss to Notre Dame. And we're going to get into what's next. But, I mean, you went out, you know what I mean? I mean, you went out, you're still in a good spot here. So, and in all honesty, that just means you got to beat Texas. Because I think Auburn is so bad. I think they're so bad. I'm just not worried about Auburn. I'm not worried about Mexico State. I think if you win those two games, you set up a win and in type of game. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that here in a minute. But so do not give up on this team. Do not give up on this team, knowing that this loss hurts, but this team is still in a position to do something special if they close out the season strong. Do not give up on these guys. I don't think anyone is, but I don't, come on, let's stick with this team. They can be really, really special. This season can be really special, and it's still on the table. So that was my first takeaway. It was Marcel Reed, I believe, should be the guy going forward. The next takeaway was missed tackles. Texas A&M missed 25 tackles in this game. And so for reference, let's do this. For reference, let's go back here. The game against Notre Dame, right? Texas A&M, they were rough tackling in that game, right? Let's see how many tackles they missed in that game. You missed 19 tackles in that game against Notre Dame. And we thought that was I'm sitting here thinking, man, that's one of the worst tackling performances I've ever seen in my life. Then according to PFF, you missed 25 against South Carolina. That is not going to work on the road. I mean, we saw, a missed tackle lead to a big touchdown. And I mean, this stuff happened a ton. I saw guys with 5 missed tackles in the stat sheet. Missing tackles can't happen. I mean, that's a losing play. You've got to be responsible. You've got to wrap up. You got to take a player down. It's not easy. Tackling is not easy. It's not easy to tackle large human beings moving very fast. It's not. But at the end of the day, missing tackles is a losing recipe. And we saw this Texas A&M team miss 25 tackles. I mean, knowing this was an issue, it's funny. It's in your 2 losses. This has been an issue. It's a common theme. Now you've lost 2 games. In those 2 games, you've combined to miss literally, let's see, 25 plus 19. You all know I don't do math in my head. 44 tackles. You've combined to miss 44 tackles in your 2 losses. That is not good. That is not in any way, shape, or form ideal. So that's got to be cleaned up. If you can't clean up these missed tackles, it's going to be really hard to win football games. I mean, You miss 20 or more tackles in a game, I don't think you win. I don't care how good your offense plays. It's just hard to win. You miss 20 tackles against Texas, you ain't winning. You miss 25, you for damn sure aren't winning. So you cannot miss tackles. You just can't do it. You cannot. I mean, I'd rather you miss none, but I mean, when you miss 25, you're not going to win a game. So, and I mean, that's something this defense is going to have to clean up. You're going to have to see this defense clean this up. I mean, seriously, at some point, you can't keep losing games because of missed tackles. It's got to be cleaned up. The 4th and 1 decisions were interesting. Do I agree with them? Do I disagree with them? We're going to talk about that coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are the first in the parking lot and who are the last to leave. We see you. I mean, the only, moment that I think in this game where I really, got me fired up when it comes to a 5 Hour Energy shot would probably be when the Aggies went ahead 2017. I mean, I think that was kind of the, okay, here we go. We're ahead now. And that was really exciting. And then, of course, it went downhill from there as they scored a ton of unanswered points. You don't score a single point in the second half and lose. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy shot is here to keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, let's do it with a 5 Hour Energy. It's available on 5hourenergy.com, and it is shipped nationwide. So there were a few 4th and 1 calls that were really questionable, I think you could say. I mean, you go for it in your territory, deep in your territory twice, and you don't get it. Once you go with, Daniels, and once you go with, and the one time you go with Marcel Reed. And, and to kind of piggyback on that, you lose LeVeon Moss, with the injury early in the game. You played 3 snaps in this game. We're not going to make an excuse like that's why you lost this game. It stinks. It hurts. He's a great player. He's one of the best backs in the SEC, but I mean, there was a lot of factors that led to you losing this game that weren't just losing LeVeon Moss. But if you want to look at stuff like that, I mean, I think those are situations where he would have been really helpful. I think it would have been really helpful, to have LeVeon Moss in situations like that. But those decisions, I think that they feel a little bit desperate. I mean, they led to, I believe it was 10 points, right? It was a touchdown on the field goal, 10 points for South Carolina. And to me, it's like you don't trust your team. Going for it, that's what they all, 4th and 1 in a situation like that, especially that early in the game, it feels like you're pressing. And I don't know if this team needed to press. I mean, look, we saw exactly this. Yeah, the not getting the first down on the 4th and 1 leads to a touchdown for South Carolina. You go down 14-0, and you still find a way to get back in this game. So, I mean, I think that looking at this, I still look at this and say to myself, okay, when looking at those decisions, I just feel like they came back to bite you a little bit. I think if you would have punted the ball away, let your defense, who did not play well, maybe, but I mean, I think especially the first one, you didn't know your defense. Obviously, they'd given up the 1 touchdown, but I don't think you necessarily knew your defense was going to play that bad at that moment. But I mean, you trust your defense, especially at that point when you went for it the first time. Trust your defense and see what they can do. I really don't understand that. Um, I don't understand those decisions. I just feel like now if you were on their 40, yes, you go for it. There's no question. I'm huge when you are past, I'd say when you're on your opponent's 45 or deeper, if you got 4th and 1 or 2, I say go for it every time. I think you should. Dan Campbell, I think you should always go for it because I think it's, that's just analytics. What do the analytics say? I think that's what you should do. Inside your territory, especially that deep inside your territory, I don't care if it's 4th and 1. It's just risky. I mean, if you don't get it, you've given them 3 points already with the chance at 7. So I don't want to question a ton of decisions. Once again, I have so much trust in this coaching staff, but I don't know if I agree with those decisions. Once again, I'm not getting paid millions of dollars to be a head coach in the SEC. I trust these coaches. I really do. But I don't know if I agree with those decisions. I want to hear y'all's thoughts on that. If y'all agree with that, going for it deep in your zone decisions. So, the LeVeon Moss injury, it sounds like I don't have a ton of confidence. Coach Elko kind of came out and said, hey, it's not as bad as we thought. Like, it's not as bad as it looked, but it's not great. It was kind of like the premise. I'll give you all the exact quote here. He basically said, I don't think it looks real good right now, but I don't think it maybe looks as bad as it might have on the field. So hopefully it's not one of those awful ones. That's not a quote that gives me a ton of confidence. It's like maybe, you got to understand, you've got, a month left in the season, basically, right? You play Texas on November 30th. So you're a few days under a month left in the season before the postseason. If this is anything, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm just saying, like, if it's a MCL sprain, or I'm just giving you like types of, knee looking injuries. What I'm saying is I don't think it's an ACL tear or anything like that, because he said it wasn't as bad as it looked on the field. But I don't know how confident I feel that he'll be back. I mean, the good news is you have a week off, then you play New Mexico State. So you don't play Auburn until the 23rd. Could LeVeon Moss be back? And then, in all honesty, I think you can beat Auburn without him. Really, the question is, can he be back for the 30th and then, against Texas and then the potential playoff push? That is where the question lies. So, I think looking at the way Le'Veon Moss's injury, that's got to be the hope, is that it's a minor MCL sprain or one of those little kind of knee injuries or just something like that where it's a 2-3 weeker or a 1 to 2 weeker, and he could be back for Auburn or Texas. I mean, I'd give him the day off against New Mexico State, because that means if you do that, if he is healthy enough to come back for that game, I'd give him the day off. He's not going to be banged up. I mean, he'll be healthy enough to go for the Auburn game on the 23rd. That gives you, 19-ish days to get healthy. I think that's definitely the play there. I think that is the way that you can kind of work around this. So, the Le'Veon Moss injury is a tough one, but you just got to hope that what that quote from Elko about the severity of it means that maybe he's not going to be out as long as it might have looked at the moment. Penalties killed this team in this game. We're going to talk about that and why you got to clean that up coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make everyone more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. So, penalties. Texas A&M had 7 penalties for 68 yards compared to 3 penalties for 25 yards for South Carolina. Much like the turnover battle, which you lost, much like the penalty battle, which you lost, these are things you don't want to lose in a game. You don't want to have more penalties, especially, I mean, if one team has 3 for 15 and one has 2 for 10, it's a little different. Like, okay, who cares? But when it's that wide of a gap, there's 68 yards to 25 yards, that matters. Penalties kill drives on offense. They keep drives going on defense. You have to be a disciplined football team. So, I mean, that's just the reality here. And you've got to not be a super penalized team. That's just the reality. You just can't, be penalized or something like that. I mean, it hurts you. I mean, like, look, against LSU, you lose that battle too. You have 10 penalties for 97 yards against LSU compared to their 5 for 35. It's a trend we've seen at times throughout this season. You cannot be a super penalized team. It's a losing recipe. That's how you lose football games. When you're not disciplined, you lose football games. And that's what happened. That's what happened in this game. I don't think penalties were the only problem in this game. We talked about it. I mean, missed tackles was a huge issue. There's a lot of issues in this game that were bigger than just penalties. But still, penalties played a role in this game. The next thing I want to talk about, so, I mean, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but, the yards per carry, you're supposed to be the ground and pound team, Texas A&M is. And you, in 43 carries, South Carolina gained 6.7 yards per tote. On 42 carries, Texas A&M, had 3.4 yards per tote. That is not going to get the job done. It's just not. Knowing 3.4 yards per carry, knowing the type of team you are and that you want to run the football, that is just flat out not a winning recipe. That's just the reality. For this team, especially that wants to run the football, you want to run the football. Well, you can't run it for 3.4 yards per carry. You're going to lose. That's just the reality, especially when your opponent's running for near 7 yards a carry. So that's something that you got to be better. I mean, you got to be able to play your brand of football if you want to beat a good football team, especially on the road. Then this was the big one for me. Another, I think this is right up there with missed tackles when it comes to my takeaways from this game. The second half adjustments weren't there. And I think, if you think about what happened for Texas A&M against LSU, that's a great example. Coach Yelko, I think, has been really good at second half adjustments. That's why when you went into this, I'll be honest with you, when you went into this game 2020 at halftime, I was saying to myself, okay. I mean, hey, here's the deal. I feel good going into halftime because I felt like they punched you in the mouth. You answered their punch, and now you've gotten used to the environment. You answered their first quarter punch, and now you have the opportunity to adjust and go win this football game. And you want to talk about the polar opposite? Texas A&M, South Carolina scores 24 points in the second half, 27 unanswered points. If you go back to the field goal that tied it at 2020, that's 27 unanswered points by this South Carolina team to go win the game 44-20. And that's just you can't do that. You can't not show up in a second half. Here's the deal. I'll tell you one thing. This is a fact. If you are tied at halftime and you don't score again the rest of the game, it's impossible to win. Just a fact. Impossible. Not possible, literally. So, I was just really, disappointed with how this team came out of the locker room. I was really disappointed with how this team came out in the second half. I was happy with where that game was at halftime, knowing the way it felt and the way it was going. It felt like, okay, we took the punches. We held the shields up and all the arrows came at us and we're still alive. Now it's time for us to attack. That's what it felt like. And it just felt like this team did nothing in the second half. And missed tackles played a role. There were penalties that played. There was just so much that played a role to the lack of second half adjustments for this team. It was just extremely, extremely frustrating to watch. It really was. It was painful watching this team play like that. It was painful watching this team lose like that in the second half, knowing how talented this football team is. So the second half adjustments was really, really something that disappointed me in this game. I will tell you that. Now, to wrap this up on a more positive note, you aren't dead. We're going to talk about tomorrow. I plan to talk about where do you go from here, but it's a better conversation that really deep dive into tomorrow. Where do you go from here? This season isn't over. Special things can still happen for Texas A&M this year. Fans need to remember that. Fans need to know that. So, point is, it's going to be okay. I believe in this team. I believe that they're going to do something special. And I'm really, really excited still for the future of the season, but we got to stick with this team. We got to stick with this team and believe. You beat Auburn, you beat New Mexico State. We know what that game against Texas means. So we got to stay with this team, ladies and gentlemen, despite this painful loss. Stick with them. I still believe something special can happen this year for the Aggies. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you all so much for being here every single day. I really, really appreciate it. Hope everyone has a great rest of their Monday, and we will see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Aggies.